Ladies and gentlemen, this is the state of the scene.
Cure by Erra. This is the Birmingham, Alabama outfit's 6th studio album, arriving the 5th of April via UNFD Records. Again, that is the Friday that you'll be listening to this review. It's still coming out. Cure consists of 12 tracks and is the much anticipated follow-up to 2021's self-titled LP, of course, by the name of Erra.
Mm-hmm.
It is the band's first studio release with guitarist Clint Tustin following the departure of Sean Price, who exited the band back in March of 22. Clint was a touring guitarist, promoted through the ranks.
I just had an incredibly funny thought. Whereas like gent guitarists have like the lifespan of like career athletes, where it's like by the time they're like 30, he's like he's too old for the league.
They play 11 seasons.
It's too much on the body. His fingers are completely fucked.
Right. God damn. Very sobering now.
Just hear them crack as he's plucking each of these strings.
It's also the band's first. This is like the most fascinating piece here that I really wanted to discuss, mainly because the producer that they collaborated with, I did not realize how much power they have gained recently. So again,
hot new producer.
It's also maybe not even new. It's also the band's first time collaborating with producer Dan Bronstein, who has some pretty insane credits, Sam.
Like
at this point, the last couple Dayseeker albums, 2 pretty big ones. I think literally everything by Spirit Box.
Okay.
Which is, again, one of the biggest metalcore bands in the scene at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The last album from Silent Planet, I believe also the one before that. The last Volumes album, and just some last tidbits for the real SOTS sickos out there. Most of the solo material from Volumes vocalist Michael Barr, and the Los Angeles LP by Riley, including a couple of other tracks from Riley. So a ton of artists that we personally fucking
so literally all of my favorite fucking like releases of the last like 5 years.
But think of like why you love some of those releases so much. A lot of it's like the production being as fucking good as it is.
Especially with bands like Dayseeker.
Yeah.
Like I think about the production on a fucking Dayseeker
Hurt Wave
album.
too. A lot of collaboration there with Dan Bronstein.
Yeah. But I think the
here.
ones that really stick out to me is like Los Angeles by Riley. Like thinking about an album like that and like the dichotomy between that and like something like this from Erra releases like Spirit Box Sound.
Yeah.
You know, the difference between metalcore and like sad boy emo hip hop.
Michael Barr right there though, like bridging everything.
Right. There's like a valley, but at the same time there are still like some bridges connecting them.
2 quotes I wanted to share, Sam, from the album's press release. Cure is the most groove-centric record we've ever made, explains guitarist/singer Jesse Cash.
Yeah.
The band's co-founder, chief songwriter. He's got every single fucking like pin and badge you can think of.
Yeah, he's beating every gym leader.
It's very rhythmically oriented. A lot of the technicality is in the right hand. It's in the right hand, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
With the riffs more so than it is in the left hand.
Nonsense. Speak to me. None of this means anything to me.
Ambidextrous
guys
people
who know
fucking...
absolutely. The riffs in the right hand or the left hand, like, bro,
he could be totally fucking with us, by the way.
And
he could have switched hands.
Is this somebody explaining to me what they just fixed in my car? I'm like, whatever.
Is he a lefty or a righty?
Boss.
Like, how does that translate?
Yeah.
A little bit more. I found a cozy little spot in that heavy mood and I leaned into it.
Sure.
A lot, Sam. You don't get into a metal band because you're trying to make it big. You get into it because you love it, Cash continues. We've always wanted to be the sort of band where you feel it in your gut that even if it takes time for your music to make an impact, there will be longevity because you're keeping it honest.
Love this quote.
There will always be an audience for that kind of honesty, no matter the size of it. That's our priority, knowing that we have our people, giving them what they want, and always expanding on that.
Let me explain it like a 5 for everybody. He says Erra is not selling out, and honest to God, I think that comes across in this album for better or
100%.
worse. I think Erra keep it fucking close to the vest. They keep it down to earth. They do not break from their integrity in any capacity. This is a bona fide Erra album.
It did connect a couple of dots for me personally, in that it made me realize that while an extremely technical band over the course of their career, going all the way back to the fucking Augment days, Erra's never really been a flashy band. And
you're literally pulling the words out of my mouth, because I've had this exact thought banked for this review.
Well, but the reason I bring this up is that has always been, for me, leading up to this record, a detriment to this
literally
band.
mimicking them. It's scary to me how identical our taste is, in a way that I don't know.
It's almost like we've been
maybe detrimental to the show.
Fucking echo
Because
chamber
I thought
in
the
here.
exact same thing, and you know what really painted a clear picture of it for me was that tour we saw with them last year, where it's like, you have my 2 favorite bands of all time, quite possibly, and
Right.
I See Stars and Bad Omens.
Sandwiched in between those is Erra.
Right. And those 2 bands are the pinnacle of flashy, the pinnacle of a show stealing moment, a melody you'll never like the pause and then the breakdown, the flashiness of it, the presentation, the aesthetic, all of it. And then you've got Erra. And Erra keeps it classy.
Blue collar.
Erra, yeah, the buttons up every single time. We just put our cap on. We're just like anybody else. We're up here playing metal.
Pull our sleeves up.
You're not going to see them up there in a massive windbreaker and a chain with flashing. I mean, some flashing lights, sure,
I've
but
never.
they're not that. That's not how they carry themselves in any way. They're not trend chasers. They're not trend chasers.
And I've never.
They're also not trendsetters, for what it's worth, either.
No, not quite. I wouldn't call them that. And I've never resented them for that.
But you know where your tastes
flashiness.
align.
Exactly.
Right. So you don't want to go out of your way to be like, yeah, I don't like Erra. You walk away from maybe an Erra album and it's like, well, I like this one, but then this one, it's like, it doesn't have the same appeal that my taste is derived from.
So for that reason, it's taken me a while to sort of warm up to Erra, but I like that they've sort of forced our hand into meeting them on their own terms.
They spoke it into existence, right? This exact quote.
Because now over the years,
we're talking about, staying consistent to what it is you want to do, and people will appreciate it overall. And you're right. It's almost like I've been weathered down.
Well, you sound so
Erra
fucking broken.
Erra has well, I mean, in a sense, yes. I think Erra has broken me of what might be a staticness in some of my taste, in a way that I think a lot of bands have broken me of that. And they've allowed me to expand on what I appreciate, so that I can enjoy more styles of not only metalcore, but music in general.
Yeah.
And I'm not always just chasing the same thing. They've broadened my horizon.
Well, so what I'll tell you is it hasn't just been Erra.
Right. Yeah.
So no. So the angle I'm taking here is that
I see where you're going. Go ahead.
I liked the self-titled more than I'd liked, Drift, the album that came before that.
Divisionary all-time banger.
Yeah, Scorpion Hymn. There were tracks on there that I walked away from really digging. And then that deluxe comes out, and there's even more on there that I'm chewing.
Maybe appreciate a cover, which I rarely do now. Right.
Yeah. But it really wasn't for me with Erra. And this is all recently developed stuff.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
That Texas in July comeback EP, Without Reason.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ghost Atlas, which is Jesse Cash's solo project, JTKV.
Those were both released this year, correct?
No, the Texas in July, which is JT's band. That was last year. I forget when. Maybe October.
We're talking like a 6-month window.
Recent developments
where Erra fans in every capacity are eating, right?
Sure. 100%. So
You're getting your fill somewhere.
So suddenly I'm listening to Texas in July and I'm having this real appreciation for what JT brings to the table.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to this Ghost Atlas album, Dust to the Human Shape. And suddenly I'm like really fucking impressed and enamored with Jesse Cash as a musician.
Yeah.
And my mindset coming into this album completely changes from when we heard Pale Iris back before the Concrete Forever tour even happened.
Right.
Up until now, we're getting a steady flow of singles. Cure came out, Crawl Backwards, Out of Heaven, and I'm really starting to anticipate this album. But it's not solely because these singles have been good. It's because suddenly I like the pieces of Erra so much more than I previously thought I had. Like I've got this appreciation for them that just wasn't there with Division or with the self-titled or the albums that came before that. So like, yes, steadily over time, this band has broken me down into appreciating everything that Erra is. And then when they come to this album and like, we're exploring some different sounds, but like a lot of this stuff would have been right at home on that last record, but I am eating it up way more than I anticipated.
Right. Like your relationship with this band has like changed, like it's grown. I really do like that. It makes me think that there's almost like some deviousness to the idea that releasing that Texas in July album, releasing that Ghost Atlas album, were just in theory ways of baiting more people into being interested into Erra, though I don't think that's necessarily the case. Ultimately, if that ends up being a reward of it, it's like a net win for everyone, right?
Sure. And I mean, ultimately, like the sounds that, or sonically, like these are different. Texas in July less so, but like Ghost Atlas is definitely a different taste of Jesse Cash while still being sort of like the same things he brings to the table here.
Yeah, sure. It's just like more diluted versions of particular aspects of Erra. Like obviously you get like this strictly softer side and then strictly heavier side. And Erra is a combination of both of them at the very least, you know. And then, you know, like the riffs become slightly more complicated to like complement them. But there's a lot of sense to what you're saying, and right. I can see what you mean by that.
So for fans of Erra who are tuned into this review, we're finally meeting you at your level. We are just like you. We're one and the same.
So you're saying this is the first time you're coming into an Erra album actually anticipating it, and I think I might agree with you on that to some degree, because I've never been a huge fan of this band, so it's never a case where I've been uninterested in a release, but I've never been sort of like teetering on the edge of like truly looking forward to it, right? Like seeing it on a calendar and thinking to myself, need to hear this.
I'll be honest, like before that self-titled came out, I was starting to not really appreciate Erra that much because I don't remember loving that record. I think it was Drift that came out before self-titled. And then we saw them, you know, JT was sick, like performing as support on like that North Lane tour with Erra.
An unfair circumstance to judge a band, but it is the one we experienced.
All of that sort of contributing to me being like, oh, maybe Erra's not quite for me. And then, yes, like over these last handful of years, like really tides have turned completely. And suddenly, yes, I am heading into this album and I am anticipating it. And honestly, like between when this album was first announced to now, my anticipation levels are like, it's a very steep incline.
Right. And then alternatively, they put on an incredible set on that Bad Omens tour.
Yeah. With, again, like some cards stacked against them.
Right. At least from a personal perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to establish, like, at this point, we are at the point where, like, yes, now we all want to hear what it is there is to like about Cure. Like why the fans came to fucking hear this review. So Sam, what did you like? I'm assuming you liked this album. What did you like about it? Where do you want to start?
Ultimately, I think what I liked about it is a lot of what we already stated, that there is something to this approach where Erra does not bend to any trends. They do not get lost in like this idea of having these like bigger, flashier moments. They and I was trying to think of how best to phrase this, but in a way, Erra really just lets the music speak for itself. And I kind of think that in the capacity of an album, this band really flourishes more than they do with singles, because I think when I'm trapped in this band's atmosphere, in like the sonic universe that they cultivate on this record, I truly do become like enthralled and engaged in a way that is diametrically opposed to how I feel like I consume this band from a singles perspective, where I feel like they did come across a little underwhelming with the single releases leading up to this, in a way that didn't fully like undercut my excitement for it. But I almost knew going into it that that was going to be the to not write them off for that. And I was right in a sense that when I finished this album, these singles in the context of this record felt much more at home than they did siloed off by themselves.
The only one I think was extremely impressive siloed off by itself was Crawl Backwards Out of Heaven.
Is that because it's speaking to the most like inner heavy music appreciator in you?
I don't
know. It feels like the more biting of the three singles.
I don't think I like that song specifically because it's the quote unquote heavy one. I think I like that song because it's an interesting, it's just a fucking eye-catching name. It's an unconventional song. It's composed in an unconventional way, in my opinion, from what I expect from this band.
It's a little more complex than your average run-of-the-mill metalcore song. So, like, overall, I just think that, like, Erra cultivates a very enriching sound. It's the kind of thing that, like, you can really just let wash over you and drink in. And, like, that makes them extremely different than the other metalcore albums that I generally tend to gravitate towards. But I think that there is room for an album like this, and there is room for me to really appreciate an album like this, and ultimately room for me to really appreciate the musicianship that I experience throughout this album. And I just walk away from this record and think to myself, these individuals are just truly talented, whether it's the riffage, whether it's the production, or whether it's the philosophical writing style, and ultimately how it all comes together here.
Yeah. What I will tell you, as far as like, I think, yes, you were spot on in that, like, all of the singles here contribute to an overall great album. Like, all of them sound at home in context, all great. I walk away from this release loving, maybe outside of Crawl Backwards Out of Heaven again, that's a standout for me. My favorite tracks on here are non-singles.
Mm-hmm.
And those are tracks like Rumor of Light, which has a really impressive chorus. It's songs like Slow Sour Bleed, which is, this band does not experiment too much on this album, but if they do it in any one place, it is on that song where they implement or they bring in a ton of synthesizer, and like it's the flashiest this band has ever sounded. So like they're appealing to me at a primal level.
So unironically, they've almost like met you in the middle here.
They did on this one track for sure. And that one is a big standout for me. I really enjoyed it. I'm curious what the overall energy around that track will be from their.
We're talking about cuts. Glimpse really popped really for me good. In particular.
Past Life Persona. End to Excess is a fucking banger. Some really, really strong material. I came into this one with high anticipation, and then realized coming out of it that it had delivered on that anticipation, in the sense that, like, I walked out of it really, really impressed. And I ended up really enjoying this record. And for me, Sam, if I had to give you a number rating for this one, it's probably, for right now, first impressions, at least a 9.
I'll undercut you slightly with an 8.5 because I think it's a really strong record release, but I do feel like there is still some aspect of me that does wish that a song or two reached the heights of adoration I had for Divisionary, for example.
Sure.
That I think is something that might be missing from here. I don't think it entirely detracts from the listening experience, but I will say that I would not have been, I would have, I suppose, preferred that there was still a track or two on here that really exceeded expectations and not simply met them.
Okay. No, I can understand that, but still to land at an 8.5 is, I mean, were you expecting that?
I just think that, no, I wasn't, because you're right. Like, I go into this album knowing that like there is an opportunity here for me to really enjoy this, but ultimately it's not generally the style of metalcore that I'm most attracted to. So I think in a way, I have to sort of reframe my perspective a little bit going into an Erra album and understand like what the experience is going to be. And I do feel a little bit like there are bands who do this in a way that I'm much more attuned to. Like last year's album, Heavener from Invent Animate, feels very stylistically similar to this.
This is a similar album for sure.
But that one for me does have those peaks, and it does speak to me a little bit more and my personal tastes. And this one, you know, would slightly live in the shadow of something like that if we're talking about albums that like are in the same breath. But I don't think that necessarily makes this a bad album. It's just like, you know, I'm thinking about what am I like framing this up against, and it's like, you know, I do think there is a version of this album that I do enjoy a little bit better. I think in that sense there maybe is like an even better version of a Erra album as well.
Oh,
you
I
know?
bet. Two things. Just because we didn't really talk about it much, I think my favorite aspect of this record is by far the lyrical angle. The aspect there is, I have very, very much come to appreciate Jesse Cash as a lyricist. And I think part of it, again, is due to me suddenly being sort of enamored with Ghost Atlas. And then hearing like some of like, I don't know, some of the things Jesse Cash says on this album.
There is every once in a while you do hear a line that really makes you like you really like sit there and chew on it for a bit.
Or even just like words, like on one of the singles, like that hideaway line. It, like just hideaway is suddenly a word I really fuck with now, thanks to Erra.
You can certainly appreciate the writing style, like no doubt. I'm 100% with you there. And it's funny because I think early on with this band, I almost had a I don't know how else to say it other than like I wish they would have dumbed it down a little bit for me without making myself sound stupid in the process. It's like, why use big word when small word work just as well type thing?
Even this review, you have used big words.
I've grown a lot since I've been an Erra fan. Yes, I agree. Me and Erra have grown together. I've grown alongside Erra.
IQ test before Erra, IQ test after Erra.
Yeah.
There's a YouTube video somewhere there.
Hilarious idea.
And sort of, honestly, just to sort of bring the discussion to a close on one of the main points that we brought up during this discussion about preferring flashy bands previously over someone like Erra is like, I'm a changed man on this episode alone when you, not to pit two bad bitches against each other, Sam, but a band like Alpha Wolf in my head, I fuck with more than Erra.
On paper, that's what you're looking for. Yes.
Right. Sonically, I'm looking for an album like Half Living Things more than I'm looking for a Cure from an Erra.
Yeah.
But coming out of this episode, talking about those two albums, I walk away a bigger fan of Cure than I do Half Living Things, even though it's Alpha Wolf doing all the flashy stuff, doing all that excessive stuff. It's not like a rabbit or a hare versus turtle thing, but like, to some credit to Jesse Cash saying like, if we just stick it out, eventually people will meet us here in the middle in some capacity. And like,
What you're trying to say is you
I'm
date
an
Alpha
example
Wolf,
of
but
that.
you settle down with Erra.
Precisely. Let's see what's in the news, Sam.
Marcus, as always, the news is brought to you by Sporty Threads, the clothing label of the alternative music scene.